All right, and welcome back to another episode of Who's Lifting Today? We are going to be talking about what I think is like a really important question. How do we get more people strength training? I think we can always talk about the finer details of training. We can talk about if you're already training, what can we do to improve that? But the truth is that most people as of right now do not lift weights at all or do any kind of strength training. And I think that needs to be a larger part of the conversation on how do we get more people into this? Because as of right now, most people don't lift weights. This is especially true as you get older. And I want to change that. I want to make sure that we get more people lifting, becoming strong, badass lifters. And I think about a lot as like, okay, first, what can I do to help that? Because I want to help people get into strength training as well as those who are already into strength training. But we need to talk about like how do we get them there in the first place, because I think that's one thing that we are not super good at right now that I want to change in the future. And I've come to a few conclusions, and there's kind of like five main points I want to talk about today that I think are holding people back from becoming stronger and what we can do about that, and then go from there. Because at the end of the day, like most people don't lift weights. This is like a much bigger problem. You can even ask people for like gym memberships as an example, like people who work at gyms, that like most of the people who have a gym membership are not using it, in which case that they're like basically just like subsidizing the experience for the rest of us. And a lot of gyms aren't even built that way, where like they couldn't even handle the amount of, if everyone actually went to their gym, that like they couldn't have the capacity for it, that their gyms are too small because they would have too many members. And I want to kind of figure out like, okay, so people are signing up for memberships. There's like a lot of motivational posts out there, but what are actually the barriers to getting people into the weight room? That's what I want to talk about today. So the first one, and this is, I think, a major barrier that exists, and I kind of blame fitness culture for this, is we need examples of people like them. So if you're someone who is 45, you're just getting into training for the first time, there's probably not a lot of examples of people like you that are in the weight room. You go into a weight room, it's very young. The people are very, very physically active, like out of the gate. And I think like they have like a certain physique to them. There's not a lot of people in their 40s in general, let alone someone like yourself who is just starting out. So it might be hard for you to believe like, oh, this is a place that I should be, just because there aren't a lot of people like you. This is something that I try to solve on my Instagram page, where I try and show like a wide range of people of different builds, people of different ages, but like are all kind of newer lifters, or like we're they're not the super crazy CrossFit look. They're not like already deadlifting 300 pounds. That's like hard to relate to as a new lifter. And you might come to the conclusion that, this place isn't for you. Like lifting is not for people in their 40s and 50s, or like at minimum strength training is not people in their 40s and 50s, that is not like the focus. So I think we need to show more examples of people who are like that, because like there are women that I work with now who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, are getting stronger, are focused on strength training, are not as focused on the weight on the scale. And I think that that is something that we need to show more, because it is hard for someone like, hey, like if there's no one around me in this space, it's hard to believe that like I should be in this space. And I think that's like the first thing that like the fitness industry needs to do a better job of, is like show a wider variety of people. I think this has gotten a little bit better, but I don't think we're quite there yet, especially in the strength training world, where a lot of those examples are like very fit, very young people. And that just doesn't resonate with the, 51-year-old mom of three who is like just getting into training, doesn't necessarily have that physique of the 21-year-old CrossFitter. And I think like that's something that we need to change and show that like strength training is for everybody. And how we do that is by showing a variety of people. And that's what I would like to see happen more often. But I think that like that's the first step, is that you need to see yourself in this space. The second one that I think we need to focus on is like, okay, let's say you've overcome that, or you've decided that like, what, strength training, like there are people like me who do that. Like, let's get into it. What are we working towards? Having a very vague goal, I think, is very hard to stick with. And if your goal is like, oh, I just want to be healthier, it's like, okay, but how do we measure that for you? And to be clear, I'm not saying like everyone needs the same goal, or you need like a hyper specific goal necessarily. Not everyone needs to be like, I want to deadlift 200 pounds. Like, I think that works for a lot of people, but I think you need something that is more specific, because you need to kind of judge, is this working for me? And if your goal is like to be healthier, but you didn't define that, you could get like 3 months into training, and then it's kind of like, am I healthier? And I don't really know. I didn't really like put a goalpost on that. So I think it's good to have specific goals, or like, what are you working towards? And I think it's also important to like, what is a goal that matters to you? You're going to spend your time on this. All right. Like, everyone can tell you what your goal should be, or like what the focus should be for where you're at. But I think like you need to decide that for yourself. If you don't, you're kind of, chasing someone else's dream, and you can only pull that off for so long. And it's hard to stay motivated when it's not actually your goal. So there's a lot of goals that I like working towards personally. I really like deadlifting. Anyone who's listened to the podcast knows that. Squatting, pull-ups, like those are really things that are really big for me. Like, I like getting into like strongman kind of activities as well. I'm getting really excited about those, but those are my goals. Maybe those are your goals that work for you, but you need to decide what is actually working for you. I think that is, what are we working towards? Make sure that it's as important to you as possible. It doesn't have to be, it can be, I want to be strong enough to go hiking with my grandkids, or I want to be strong enough to live independently for the rest of my life. Like, whatever those goals might be, just make sure that it's yours. And then, you can make a plan to work towards that. You can see that the work is paying off. Because I think as well is that, like, if you have a goal and 6 months later you're nowhere closer to achieving that goal, that's also hard to stick with. So I think that, you need a good goal as well as a plan to realize that, like, oh, like, my plan is helping me achieve that goal. I think those are very, very important, especially as a new lifter who hasn't really fallen in love with the strength training process yet, where like it's very easy for someone like myself who's been training for like 10 plus years at this point, because I've been doing it forever. It is a full-on habit at this point. Even if I didn't have like a very specific goal, like I probably would still strength train pretty regularly. But if for someone who is entirely new, I think having a specific goal, even if it's just something that would be fun, even if it's arbitrary, is going to be better than like going into the gym just because like you're supposed to, as like kind of an example. So that's kind of like point number 2 that I wanted to bring up. 3, we need to plan it out. Okay. Our lives are busy. We have things going on. You have kids, business, job, whatever that might be. And you need to plan this out essentially in the same way that you would plan out like a dentist appointment or something along those lines. That's going to be a huge deal, because if you don't plan it out, or if you're like, oh, I'll just go when I like have free time, like that free time is never coming up, or it's going to be very inconsistent to do. And so this is one of those things that, like, one, you need to be realistic about your schedule. If you can't train 6 days a week, don't train 6 days a week. Make a 3-day-a-week program. If you can only train at home, that's totally fine if you don't have time to travel, but you need to make this realistic for what your schedule is. And that is what's going to matter in the long run. It's not really about like how much you crush January and the New Year's resolutions, or it's not necessarily like how well your first month goes. It's like, we want to plan this out so that you can be consistent year round, whatever amount of training that is. If that's twice a week, it's twice a week, 3 times a week, 4 times a week, etc. If it's 30 minutes, like, let's make the best 30-minute workout that you can. But we have to be realistic about when we can actually go to train. I think this also is big on like if you're a morning or evening person. There's a lot of conversations about like when is the best time to work out. My advice is like, when is the best time that realistically fits your schedule and that you will be most likely to stick with? As an example, I'm not really a morning person. I used to work out at like 7 a.m. before class back when I was in university. And, I did it for a bit, but it ends up just being not realistic. I don't like waking up super early. And that's not going to be the time that works best for me. It worked a lot better when I was like a late morning or early afternoon. And that's what I've noticed sticks with me the best. But again, this is very specific to me. Some people are early, they're morning risers. They're like 5 a.m. They're like ready to go. I have no idea what that's like, but they seem really excited to get up at 5 a.m. Then go to a 6 a.m., training session, or do, if that's the time that works best for you. If you're not an evening person, then like don't train in the evening. I think, we have to be realistic about who we are and what works best for us. That's going to be big. And if we're going to stick with this long term and you're not a morning person and you're always going in at 6 a.m., Yeah, you can probably do it for a little bit, but like, are we going to stick with that schedule? Like, that's going to be pretty hard to hold up. So I think, we need to plan it out like an appointment as an example. So like, if something comes up that we're not throwing training out the window as kind of an example, like this is your training time in the same way that like if you were going to go to a dentist appointment or a chiropractic appointment or something else might come up that you wouldn't be like, oh, I'll just throw that out the window and like do something else. Is like, no, like this time is booked. Like, and I think that is super important if we're going to like actually stick with training long term and keep going with that. So the fourth one is I think we need to make this as fun as possible. I had a really good question that was asked to me like a month ago, which was like, what if I just don't like strength training? And I think that's a really good question because if you don't like it, it's honestly just going to be hard to stick with. Willpower is finite. And if we don't, we can only use so much of it. Like, regardless of like, I don't care what like inspirational videos you've seen online, no pain, no gain, whatever. Like at the end of the day, like you are a person with a finite amount of willpower. And if we don't like something, that willpower is going to require way more. It's going to be way harder to use. And it's more likely that we give up in the long run. And, kind of the answer I asked her was like, okay, well, what is it about strength training you didn't like? And to her, she mentioned kind of like the social aspect of it. And then she mentioned that she isn't really sure like what she's doing. Like she goes in there for like 30 minutes and she tries out random things, but it's not fun for her because she's not really sure if that's like what she's supposed to be doing. And she's alone, which is why she, previously focused more on group classes and things like that because there was like a social aspect that existed. So if we want to make the strength training fun for her, some potential solutions would be, okay, well, you want the social aspect? I totally agree. Like there's semi-private training that exists where it's like 4 or 5 people, but you still have some kind of training. Not all gyms have this, but it's becoming more popular. And I'm excited about that because I think that'll open up training to more people. The second one is like maybe invite a friend who's like a similar level of strength training to you. Maybe you guys do the same program together. Maybe you do different programs. I think that's like something that could help from the social aspect in terms of like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing. That's totally fair. Maybe you go in the weight room and you're like, there's all these different options. Like it's almost too many options. I think this is where like having a program of like sets, reps, exercises, like very specific helps. So that way you go in and like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And then you can look at the program and be like, oh yeah, these 5 exercises. And then you can do those 5 and you stayed on program and it's easier to stick with. So that's how you make it fun and how you make it consistent for her specifically. If you don't like strength training now, I think the important question you have to ask yourself is, well, why? Like, what is the thing? And then see if you can remove that from the strength training process. Sometimes like most people I know actually like strength training once they like get into it. But there can be barriers at the beginning. Then maybe they have an idea of like what strength training is. Strength training can be a lot of things. So if you don't like strength training right now, I would just think like, okay, what is the reason that I don't like strength training? And can I remove this from the process or minimize it as much as possible and then go from there? The fifth one, I think, is support. I think this is super valuable because strength training is a new challenge. And with any new challenge, it is unlikely that we just jump into it and we're like, I crushed it. Week 1, it's amazing. I know it all now. I think we have to like be realistic about this. Is like, there's going to be some help that is needed and some assistance you're going to have to go through. That I think is like, and that's okay. Like we all started that way. And I think it's important that we accept that maybe at the beginning of this journey, we are not quite ready. And that's fine. Like there's absolutely no judgment whatsoever. But we all needed help. I needed help at the beginning. Now I help people. And it's okay because this is completely new. And this would be like true for like kind of any new venture, whether that would be like public speaking or writing, or you want to get into finance or real estate or whatever it might be, that like there's going to be someone who's probably going to have to educate you on the basics to go from there. And this doesn't mean you need a trainer necessarily forever. Some people like having a trainer forever because it has like a level of accountability and helps them keep in check and keeps interesting. But I think having some help at the beginning goes a long way. So the 5 points. How do we get more people strength training? What are the major barriers, in my opinion? 1, we need examples of people like them. All right. Like if you're a 45-year-old who wants to get into strength training, I think seeing another 45-year-old who also is in strength training is going to help a lot and kind of see yourself in that world. Second, what are we working towards? Make this goal specific. Make this goal specific to you and what matters to you. And, as specific as possible, I would say. Sometimes hyper specific goals have like a negative effect for some people who it gets a little too obsessive. But overall, like you want as specific as possible that makes sense for you. Third, plan it out. Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays, 6 a.m. or Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, after work. Like that's when I go work out. Those are the times I am booked for those times. That's going to help a lot. 4, make it as fun as possible. Pick exercises that you like. If there's something you don't like about strength training, see if you can remove that from the process and that it's not necessarily the training in itself. And 5, get some support, whether that's like a semi-private class, whether that's like a friend who knows what they're doing in the strength training world. And what I say is like, if you're going to get the friend to help you, make sure that they know not just like how they train, but know how to like train others. Cause like, just because someone's in the gym for a long time, it means that they know how to like follow a program and they know how to train themselves and what works for them. But everyone's a little bit different and you want to make sure that that's right for you. So whatever friend you pick, just make sure that they like, and I know how to train other people who aren't myself. I think like that's super important. And it could also be a trainer as well, both online and in person. There are more things that are coming up that are being accessible. There's more resources than like ever before. I think, in my opinion, what works the best is semi-private and private training, either online or in person. I think like you'll get the best benefit of training. There are other options that exist as well, but if you're just like, which one is the best, I think that those work the best for most people. Let me know your thoughts. You can send me a message and let me know like what's holding you back from strength training and we can talk about it. You can message me on my Instagram at Training Strong Women, or you can send me an email at strongwithmark@gmail.com. But thanks for listening to another episode of Who's Lifting Today.